Fake bitch, that's what my friend fucked on your nigga. Both you bitches pussy, I think you should scissor. Bought a chain, I'm about to say one even bigger. She doing shots, that's how I know I got a trigger.
She whispered one name before the world went dark. Michael. Those were the last words anyone ever heard from her. Hours later, her body was found dumped like refuse on a cold Cleveland street, just steps away from where she had built her life. In that moment, all the color and music in her world vanished, replaced by a haunting silence no one could make sense of. Let's rewind. This is not simply the story of a crime. It's the story of a young woman's rising dreams, love misjudged, and the hidden violence that smothered it all. Over the next 6 parts, we'll follow the path from her hopeful beginnings to the moment everything shattered. In part 1, we begin at the start. Her childhood. Her first steps into music and community. And the relationship that would darken her brightest days. The summer air in Cleveland buzzed with heat and distant sirens as Bernicia Lightfoot, known by her stage name Ada, leaned over the mixing board in a cramped studio. Her focus was absolute, her voice alive with ambition. She had spent months refining her flow, weaving in stories of struggle, survival, and hope. Even among peers, she had always carried an intensity that demanded attention. She was born on the 19th of July, 1997, in Cleveland, Ohio, a city whose grit and scars she wore like armor. Growing up, Bernicia was no stranger to hard work. In her teenage years, she had labored in factories alongside men far older than herself. It wasn't glamorous or easy, but it grounded her. It testified to her resolve. She wouldn't wait for opportunity to come knocking. She would open the door herself. Music had always been the spark inside her. Late nights recording beats, scribbling lyrics in journals, performing wherever she could find a mic. Ada's presence grew. On social media, she stoked a small but ardent following. Locally, her name started to carry weight. But Ada was more than words and rhythms. She became involved with the Wolfpack Gunshot Response Team, a group dedicated to teaching first aid and trauma response after shootings, vital work in neighborhoods where violence was a constant threat. Through that, she wasn't just telling stories. She was trying to save lives. Her personality was magnetic. According to those who knew her, she was generous, protective, and eager to uplift others. Her mentor in the Wolfpack, Sunsari Shakur, would later call her my brightest, insisting she was always first to step forward in community events. She had a sincerity that made complaining seem small, but wanting to do more feel natural. Yet behind the creative glow, cracks were forming. At some point, Bernicia began seeing a man named Michael Roarty Nugent. To the world, they appeared like a typical young couple, laughing, posting, sharing milestones. But to those who watched more closely, something whispered. This was not so simple. Michael's past was a tapestry of red flags. For nearly a decade, his name appeared in court records, domestic violence charges, drug offenses, weapons cases. That kind of history was not easy to dismiss. Friends warned her, family pleaded, yet Bernicia held tight to hope. Hope that love could rewrite history, that her light could soften even the hardest shell. Still, unease followed them. As time passed, Adam's bright optimism collided with Michael's volatility. Simple disagreements escalated. Some nights, the tension crept in the rooms of her apartment. Muffled arguments, slammed doors. No one expected those shadows to swallow her. By mid-July 2023, she was on the cusp of her 26th birthday, a milestone she meant to mark with new music, new energy, maybe the breakthrough she had long chiseled toward. But in the days leading up to it, her posts became quieter, her voice more tense. Her loved ones tried to connect. On July 18, when her family couldn't reach her at all, the fear became too big to ignore. They requested a welfare check at her apartment in Bedford. When officers arrived, they found signs of violence, dried blood, and bullet holes. Her phone was later discovered in a yard nearby, a gruesome clue in the open air. Neighbors recalled gunshots echoing late at night. One witness told police Michael had been seen dragging something down the apartment stairs. Wrapped up, Michael disappeared. The last person known to be with Bernicia vanished into shadow. Investigators gathered clues. Surveillance footage placing Michael near where her phone lay. Forensic evidence inside her home. Soon, he was arrested and became their prime suspect. But even as the case began to close in on him, critical questions remained unanswered. What had happened in those final hours? What drove someone so close to her to silence her voice, and how had a relationship built on trust spiraled into this tragedy? There's so much more to this story that will leave you speechless. If you find it worth listening to, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. The discovery at Bernicia's apartment was only the beginning. By the time police pieced together the trail of evidence, they realized they weren't just looking at a disappearance, they were staring straight into a homicide. Her phone abandoned outside, bullet holes carved into her walls, dried blood smeared across her floorboards. Each detail pointed toward a violent eruption that no one had been there to stop. Neighbors recalled that on the night of July 17th, muffled screams had drifted through the Bedford complex, followed by sharp cracks like firecrackers, unmistakable gunshots. Some dismissed it, thinking it was just another night in a city where noise was part of the background. But others remembered it too clearly. One woman later testified she had seen Michael dragging something heavy down the stairs, wrapped in fabric. At the time, she hadn't dared to intervene. But when Bernicia's body was later found, that memory turned into a living nightmare. Police knew they had to move quickly. Michael Rory Nunn, her boyfriend, the man she'd trusted to be at her side, had vanished. He didn't return calls, didn't go to work, didn't check in with anyone. For detectives, this was no coincidence. He was no longer just a person of interest. He was their prime suspect, and yet, the mystery deepened. Why would Michael kill her now, on the eve of her birthday, just days after she had been celebrating new music releases and teasing her upcoming EP? To many, Bernicia seemed on the brink of transformation, ready to step fully into her identity as Ada, the rapper, the voice of resilience. What could have been so heavy, so volatile, that it ended in bloodshed? When Michael was arrested, the truth began to leak out in fragments. He confessed to shooting her not in a fit of passion during some spontaneous argument, as some might have guessed, but in a deliberate act. He admitted that on July 17th, hours before her birthday, he pulled the trigger and silenced her forever. He told investigators where they could find her body, dumped like trash in Cleveland's Slavic village. He even led them to the firearm he had used. His confession left little room for doubt, but it did not provide the why. It didn't answer the question that haunted her family, her friends, and even strangers who read about her death. What could drive someone who shared her bed, her life, her secrets to execute such brutality? For her mother, the devastation was indescribable. She had raised a daughter who was smart, ambitious, and deeply compassionate. She had watched her fight her way through factory shifts, long nights of writing music, and the heartache of living in a city where violence was more than background noise. It was reality. To lose her child, not to the streets, not to random danger, but to the man she had chosen, was a betrayal too cruel to bear. Bernicia's mentor in the Wolfpack gunshot response team, the one who had called her "my brightest," described how deeply she believed in saving lives, not losing them. She had trained tirelessly to show young people what to do when violence broke out, teaching them how to stop bleeding, how to keep breathing, how to live another day. And yet, when violence came to her own door, there had been no one to save her. The community reeled. To Cleveland's music scene, Ada had been more than just another rapper trying to break through. She embodied authenticity. She wasn't trying to imitate anyone. Her lyrics spoke of pain but also of power, the kind of words people connected with because they came from lived experience. In losing her, the community lost a voice that could have carried far beyond Ohio. Michael's story, however, painted a different picture. He had been in and out of the justice system for years. Domestic violence charges, drug arrests, weapons offenses. To law enforcement, he was no stranger. To people who knew him, he was trouble. Even from behind bars, his life was marked by chaos. In 2020, he had even filed a lawsuit, claiming guards had assaulted him. He was volatile, unstable, and dangerous. And yet, Bernicia had seen something in him worth holding on to. Or maybe she had simply believed she could outshine his darkness with her light. It is a gamble so many women take, hoping that love will be enough to erase someone's past. This time, it cost her everything. When news of her death broke, vigils appeared across the city. Friends, family, and fans lit candles, painted murals, and played her music into the night. They refused to let her story end in silence. They remembered her as not only a rapper, but as a protector, a mentor, a role model. But underneath the grief was also anger. Anger that the system had failed to protect her. Anger that the warning signs of Michael's violent history had not been enough to shield her from becoming his final victim. In the courtroom, that anger boiled into quiet fury as Michael appeared in shackles. Prosecutors laid out the chilling sequence of events. How he had killed her, how he had disposed of her body, how he had tried to cover his tracks. They presented the evidence: her abandoned phone, the blood, the surveillance footage, the witness statements. Piece by piece, the case against him grew impossible to deny. Michael pled not guilty at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. Eventually, he was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, tampering with evidence, and gross abuse of a corpse. He was sentenced to between 23 and 28 years behind bars. For some, it was justice. For others, it was not nearly enough. What haunted many was not just the brutality of the act itself, but the betrayal behind it. Bernicia had given her trust, her love, her time to someone who saw her not as a partner but as something disposable. That betrayal cut deeper than any headline could capture, and it left the community with a larger question. How many other women face the same danger in silence, ignoring the red flags, holding on to hope until it is too late? As candles burned and her music played through the night, people whispered about what could have been. Ada could have been Cleveland's next breakout star. She could have been the one to carry her neighborhood's stories onto national stages. She could have been alive, still saving lives,
We need to be
Still
thinking
inspiring.
big.
Instead,
You
her
need to be
voice now
thinking
lived
big,
only in
bitch.
recordings, her
You need to
future
be
forever
thinking big,
stolen.
bitch.
What's most chilling is this: her story is not unique. For every Bernicia, there are countless women trapped in cycles of love and danger, torn between hope and fear. The question lingers: how do you see the moment when devotion turns deadly? There's so much more beneath the surface of this tragedy. If you want to follow the rest of the story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next part. The courtroom was heavy with silence the day Michael Rory Nunn was brought before the judge. Shackled at the wrists, head lowered, he looked nothing like the figure Bernicia's family remembered. This was not the man who had once smiled beside her in photos, who had once promised her love. This was the man accused of silencing her forever, and every person in that room felt the weight of his betrayal. The prosecutor's voice cut through the stillness, laying out the chilling sequence. First, the timeline. July 17th. Hours before her birthday. Gunshots inside her Bedford apartment. Then the aftermath. Neighbors reporting strange noises. One even witnessing him dragging what looked like a wrapped body. Next, the forensic evidence. Bullet holes, dried blood, her phone discarded in a nearby yard. And finally, the most damning detail of all, Michael's own confession. He had admitted to killing her, to leading police to her body in Slavic village, to handing over the gun that ended her life. Each word carved deeper into the grief etched across her family's faces. Her mother clutched tissues that had long since soaked through, while her friends stared at Michael with quiet fury. They had lost someone irreplaceable, and now they were forced to relive the brutality in cold detail. For the defense, there was little room to maneuver. At first, Michael entered a plea of not guilty, but it rang hollow. The mountain of evidence loomed too large. Witness testimony, surveillance footage, forensic traces all pointed squarely at him. The courtroom murmured when his criminal history was read aloud. Years of domestic violence, charges, drug offenses, weapons arrests, a long trail of red flags ignored or minimized, culminating in this ultimate act of violence. The judge listened, stone-faced, before setting bond at $2 million, an amount that underlined the severity of the case. For Bernicia's supporters, it was a small sign that the system was finally taking her death seriously. But no number, no condition, could undo what had been done. The damage was permanent. As the trial unfolded, prosecutors painted Michael as a man of volatility and control. He was no stranger to chaos, they argued. He thrived in it. Even in custody, he had a record of conflict. In 2020, he had gone so far as to sue jail officers, claiming he had been assaulted, a glimpse, perhaps, of the combative spirit that seemed to follow him everywhere. But the real horror lay not in his past, but in his choice. To turn a gun on the woman who had stood by him despite it all. The community watched closely. News stations aired updates, and local papers published editorials reflecting the anger and sorrow of Cleveland residents. For many, the case was not just about Bernicia. It was about every woman who had ever stayed in a relationship despite the red flags. Her story became a mirror, forcing people to ask hard questions. How many chances had been missed to protect her? How many warnings had been ignored? By early 2024, the legal process reached its conclusion. Michael was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, tampering with evidence, and gross abuse of a corpse. The charges were chilling not only for what they described the killing itself, but for what they revealed about his disregard afterward. He had treated her body like an object, discarding it in a neighborhood already burdened with hardship, as though her life and dreams meant nothing at all. The judge sentenced him to between 23 and 28.5 years in prison at Lorraine Correctional Institution, a number that, on paper, seemed heavy. To Bernicia's family, it felt like a hollow consolation. "It's not enough," one relative told reporters. "We don't get her back. We don't get to hear her laugh again. We don't get to watch her perform or see her future. He took that away, and now he just gets years. We get forever." The sentence closed one chapter, but it opened another. For her mentor at the Wolfpack gunshot response team, the loss was especially painful. She had been one of their brightest, the one who connected with children in schools, who never hesitated to step forward. In interviews, he described how Bernicia had transformed her own pain into service, how she had taught others to survive shootings, even as she couldn't survive the one that came to her own home. That irony, that cruel twist, left him haunted. Cleveland's music community also mourned. Fellow artists remembered her drive, her energy, the way she walked into a studio and filled it with determination. They replayed her tracks, shared her freestyles online, and spoke of the future she had been chasing. Some even admitted they struggled to keep recording after her death because the silence left behind felt too heavy. She had been more than competition. More than a colleague, she had been a symbol of hope. In the weeks after sentencing, vigils turned into rallies. Advocates for women's safety used her story to call for stronger protections,
Y'all hoe broke.
for greater
Y'all hoe
awareness
can't
of
buy nothing to
domestic
eat,
violence.
Ain't got no car,
Red
no
flags.
apartment.
They spoke about the need to listen when women say they feel unsafe, to act before it's too late. Her name became a banner, carried at protests and written on posters. She was not just a victim anymore, she was a reminder, a warning, and for some, a call to action. But even with justice delivered in the legal sense, the question of why refused to fade. Why, on the eve of her 26th birthday, did Michael decide to kill her? Why did he choose violence when he could have chosen to walk away? Some speculated jealousy that her growing fame made him feel small. Others whispered about control, that he could not stand her independence, her strength, her refusal to be diminished. The truth, perhaps, lay tangled in all of it. But the only person who truly knew was Michael himself. For her loved ones, that unanswered why was the hardest part. They could process the facts, the bullets, the body, the arrest, but they could not reconcile the betrayal, could not fathom how love had transformed into murder. It left them staring at empty chairs during family dinners, replaying her voice in old videos, and asking themselves if they could have done something, anything to prevent it. As Cleveland moved on, Bernicia's absence remained sharp. Her story became one more statistic in a country where intimate partner violence claims the lives of women daily. But those who knew her refused to let her fade into numbers. They remembered her as Ada, the rapper who rapped about survival and still believed in joy. They remembered her as the young woman who taught others how to stop bleeding, who believed every life was worth saving. They remembered her as a daughter, a sister, a friend, stolen far too soon. And in that remembering came a haunting question, one that stretched beyond her case, beyond Cleveland. How many more women are living right now with red flags fluttering all around them, convinced they can fix the man they love? There's still so much more to uncover in this story, not just about Bernicia's final days, but about the hidden patterns of violence that ripple through communities. If you don't want to miss what comes next, make sure you subscribe before the next part. The trial may have ended with a sentence, but the story of Bernicia Lightfoot Ada did not end inside that courtroom. In many ways, it was only just beginning. Her name became part of a larger conversation, one that reached beyond Cleveland, beyond Ohio, and into a national reckoning about intimate partner violence. Because the truth was this: Bernicia was not alone. Every year, thousands of women across the United States are killed by men they once trusted, men they once loved. According to the CDC, more than half of female homicide victims are killed by a current or former intimate partner. Behind each number lies a story eerily similar to hers. A woman who saw the red flags but believed love was enough. A family left shattered. A community stunned by the brutality. Bernicia's case hit harder because she had been so visible, so full of promise. She wasn't just anyone. She was a rising artist, an advocate, a leader in her neighborhood. Her lyrics had captured both her pain and her power, and her work with the Wolfpack gunshot response team showed her determination to heal others. To lose her in this way wasn't just tragic, it was symbolic of a larger epidemic, one that Cleveland knew too well. In neighborhoods across the city, the cycle of violence echoed. Poverty, unemployment, underfunded schools, and fractured support systems created the perfect storm for domestic violence to thrive. For many, the warning signs were familiar. Arguments that turned physical, controlling behavior disguised as love, isolation from friends and family. Often, these patterns unfolded in silence, behind closed doors, until they erupted in tragedy. Bernicia's death forced people to look closer, to admit that the problem wasn't distant or abstract. It was right there, in their homes, in their neighborhoods, in their lives. Community leaders began to speak out. At vigils, pastors preached not just about loss, but about prevention. Advocates called for more resources for women in abusive relationships, safe shelters, hotlines, counseling, and intervention programs. They argued that the system had failed Bernicia long before that fatal night. Michael's history of violence was well documented. But what had those records done to protect her? He had slipped through the cracks again and again, his offenses stacking like bricks until they formed a wall too heavy to climb. For her family, those cracks felt like betrayal. They asked why someone with such a violent past was free to begin with. Why the justice system had not acted more decisively after his earlier offenses. They asked why it took their daughter's death for people to pay attention. At the same time, women in her circle began sharing their own stories, whispered confessions of violence endured, of bruises hidden under makeup, of love twisted into fear. Some admitted they had stayed too long in dangerous relationships, convinced they could change the man they loved, convinced things would get better. Their voices wove into a chilling chorus. Bernicia's story was not an exception. It was a pattern. Even as Cleveland grieved, Bernicia's music kept playing. Fans blasted her tracks in cars, at block parties, at candlelight vigils. Her words took on new meaning. Lyrics about resilience and survival now sounded prophetic, as though she had been trying to warn others even as danger crept closer to her own door. "Let a try me, I'm a turn to a new ghost," she had once rapped. Now, that line carried a haunting resonance, one that made listeners shiver. Her social media pages became memorials. Followers left comments like prayers, confessing their heartbreak, their anger, their admiration. Some promised to carry her legacy forward, to keep making music in her honor, to keep serving the community the way she had. In those online spaces, she lived on not as a victim, but as a force. But the deeper her story spread, the more it raised uncomfortable questions. Why do so many women ignore the red flags? Why do communities look away until it's too late? Why is it so hard to leave a dangerous relationship, even when the signs are obvious? Experts on domestic violence explained that the answer wasn't simple. Leaving an abuser can be the most dangerous moment of all. That's when violence escalates, when threats turn into actions. Fear, love, financial dependence, even hope. All these factors keep women tethered to men who may one day kill them. Bernice's story became a lens for these discussions, a real face to attach to the statistics. She wasn't a stranger in a headline. She was Ada, a daughter, a sister, a friend, a mentor. People who had once never thought about domestic violence began to see it everywhere. Her death forced them to realize how fragile safety could be, how quickly love could transform into something lethal. In Cleveland, murals went up in her honor. One painted her in bold colors, microphone in hand, haloed by flowers. Another depicted her as both artist and angel, her gaze steady, her presence unshakable. For those who passed by, the message was clear. She was not forgotten. Her voice had been silenced, but her story still spoke. Yet, beneath the memorials and the vigils, there was a lingering unease. If someone as strong, as independent, as community-minded as Ada could be taken in this way, what hope was there for others who didn't have her visibility, her platform, her network of supporters? If she could be reduced to a statistic, who was safe? The tragedy left a permanent scar, not just on her family, but on her city. And it left behind a question that continues to echo. When the warning signs are clear and the danger is close, why is it that love still convinces us to stay? There's more to this story, still more heartbreak, more lessons, and more haunting details you haven't heard yet. If you're invested in finding out, don't forget to subscribe, because Part 5 will take us deeper into the fallout for those who loved her most. In the days after Michael's sentencing, the courtroom emptied, the cameras turned away, and Cleveland returned to its daily rhythm. But for the Lightfoot family, there was no returning to normal. Every room in their home seemed quieter, every conversation interrupted by the weight of her absence. The loss of a daughter, a sister, a confidant. It was a silence that no sentence could fill. Her mother, who had once spoken proudly of Bernice's discipline and compassion, now woke in the night to the memory of her laughter. She scrolled endlessly through photos and videos on her phone, replaying moments when her daughter was alive, smiling, glowing with ambition. Sometimes she found herself reaching to call her, forgetting, if only for a second, that there would be no answer. Grief does that. It tricks you into believing, just for a moment, that the person might still walk through the door. Her siblings, too, carried their own shadows. Some were angry, furious at the man who had taken her from them. Others were broken, trying to understand how the warning signs had slipped past them. They replayed old conversations, searching for clues they might have missed. The moments when her voice cracked, the times when her energy seemed dimmer. If only they had pressed harder, they thought. If only they had asked the right questions. Survivors of loss know this torment well. The endless cycle of what-ifs that never bring peace. Outside the home, Bernice's friends struggled in their own ways. Those who had rapped alongside her in studios said it felt wrong to keep recording, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Others kept her memory alive by blasting her tracks, quoting her lyrics on social media, or painting murals in her honor. Each act was a rebellion against forgetting, a refusal to let her be reduced to a headline. The Wolfpack gunshot response team, where she had trained as a medic, felt her absence most acutely. Her mentor described walking into training sessions and seeing her empty chair, remembering the way she had always volunteered first. She had been fearless, not just in music but in service, stepping into situations where most would hesitate. Now, her teammates honored her by dedicating their sessions to her memory. They told new recruits about Ada, the one who had turned pain into purpose. But grief is complicated. Alongside the tributes came guilt. Friends whispered to one another about the red flags, the arguments, the tension, the man with a violent past. They admitted they had worried, but they had trusted her judgment. She was strong, independent, smart. If she said she could handle it, who were they to question her? Now, they wondered if silence had been a mistake. Should they have intervened? Should they have pushed her harder to leave? Her death forced everyone close to her to reckon with those uncomfortable questions. It wasn't just about mourning. It was about confronting the truth of how easily violence hides in plain sight. The city itself seemed to move in two rhythms. On one hand, life continued. Kids went to school. Music played in bars. Traffic filled the streets. On the other, there was a collective awareness that something had shifted. A rising star had been extinguished, and people felt it. At community gatherings, her name came up, again and again. Some spoke of her as a cautionary tale, others as a symbol of resilience. Either way, she had become part of Cleveland's story. For her family, though, public attention was a double-edged sword. On one hand, they were grateful for the support, the vigils, the donations, the murals. On the other, the constant reminders reopened wounds that never had a chance to close. They wanted justice, but they also wanted privacy, space to grieve away from cameras and hashtags, and yet, they also felt a responsibility. Bernicia had been more than just their loved one. She had been a voice in her community. To honor her, they believed they had to keep speaking, keep warning others, keep reminding the world that domestic violence kills. Her mother gave interviews, her siblings posted messages online, all with the same plea. Don't ignore the signs. Don't stay when you know it's dangerous. Don't believe love will change someone who refuses to change themselves. At her memorial services, these themes repeated like a chorus. Pastors called for vigilance. Advocates handed out hotline numbers and pamphlets. Musicians performed her tracks, their voices cracking under the weight of grief. Children from the neighborhoods she once mentored placed flowers near her photos, whispering that they missed her. In those moments, her impact was undeniable. But in the quiet of the night, away from the vigils and the rallies, her family sat with the rawest question of all. How do you keep living when the person you loved most has been taken in such a brutal way? How do you carry joy when every celebration feels like a betrayal of your grief? How do you heal when every corner of your city holds a memory of the one you lost? The Lightfoots found their answer not in forgetting, but in building. They began to discuss foundations, scholarships, ways to keep her legacy alive. If Bernicia's voice had been silenced, then maybe they could amplify others. If her future had been stolen, then maybe they could help someone else's future grow. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave it direction. Yet even as they built, the shadows lingered. There were nights when her mother still dreamed of her, only to wake to emptiness. Days when her friends scrolled through her social media, half expecting a new post. Hours when her siblings wondered if healing was even possible. Trauma is not linear. It loops back, drags you under, then lets you breathe, only to pull you down again. And through it all, one haunting thought never went away. What if love itself is the most dangerous illusion of all? That question is what makes her story resonate far beyond Cleveland, far beyond true crime documentaries. Because somewhere, right now, another young woman is ignoring red flags, convincing herself that love will keep her safe. Somewhere, right now, another family is trusting that their daughter is strong enough to handle it. And somewhere, right now, another Michael is waiting, his violence coiled like a spring. The Lightfoots know this too well, and it leaves us with a question that has no easy answer. How do we break the cycle when love itself can become the weapon? There's one final chapter left in this story, one that will push us to confront not just what happened to Bernicia, but what it means for all of us. If you're ready for that, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. The candles had burned down to wax and ash, the vigils faded, and the court case closed. Yet, long after the headlines moved on, the story of Bernicia Lightfoot Ada refused to be forgotten. Her name still surfaced in conversations, in classrooms, in songs shared late at night. She had become more than a rapper, more than a victim. She had become a symbol, a warning, and, in her own way, a call to action. In Cleveland, her murals remained, splashes of color against brick walls, keeping her presence alive in neighborhoods that still carried scars of violence. Children walked past them on their way to school, pausing sometimes to trace the outlines of her face. For them, Ada was not just a memory, she was proof that someone from their streets could dream big, work hard, and shine bright. Even in death, she was a mentor. Her music, too, endured. Fans played her tracks on streaming platforms, some discovering her for the first time after her murder. Lines that once sounded like braggadocio now carried the weight of prophecy, transformed by hindsight. Her voice, fierce yet vulnerable, became a haunting reminder of all she might have accomplished. In playlists dedicated to lost artists, her name sat alongside others whose lives were cut short too soon. But her story was not just about music. It became woven into larger conversations about domestic violence. Advocacy groups in Cleveland began citing her case in workshops and seminars. Her face appeared on slideshows and flyers, her biography retold as both inspiration and warning. She saved lives, one speaker said at a conference on women's safety, but the system couldn't save hers. Those words echoed like a verdict. The statistics were grim. Across America, intimate partner violence remained one of the leading causes of death for women. Studies showed that women were far more likely to be killed by someone they knew, a boyfriend, a husband, an ex, than by a stranger. Each year, thousands of lives were lost in this way, often after warning signs had already surfaced. The parallels to Ada's story were chilling. Her family pushed forward with projects in her name, scholarships, mentorship programs, community drives, all intended to carry her spirit into the future. They wanted the world to remember her not for the way she died, but for the way she lived. Hardworking, ambitious, compassionate, unafraid. They wanted her legacy to be more than tragedy. They wanted it to be change. And yet, even as her memory was honored, the haunting questions remained. Could her death have been prevented? Could someone have intervened? Could the system have acted sooner? With Michael's long criminal history, for every mural painted, for every scholarship awarded, there was still the lingering ache of what might have been if only someone, somewhere, had stopped the cycle before it claimed her life. Her story also forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about love. Why do so many people, men and women alike, believe they can change someone bent on destruction? Why does affection blind us to danger, even when the signs are flashing red? For Ada, those questions were no longer theoretical. She had gambled on love, and the cost had been her life. But perhaps the most chilling truth of all is that her story is not rare. Every day, in cities across the country, another woman is silenced by someone she trusted. Another family gathers around a casket, whispering, "If only." Another community wonders how they missed the signs. And each time, the cycle continues. In Cleveland, people still talk about her. They still tell newcomers about the rapper who almost made it, the medic who taught children how to save lives, the young woman whose smile lit up rooms. They still shake their heads at the cruelty of her ending. And they still ask themselves what it means for the rest of them. Because if Ada, with all her strength, her ambition, her community, and her light, could be taken in this way, what chance does anyone else have? That's the shadow her story leaves behind, not just grief, not just anger, but a question that refuses to go away. A question about the fragility of safety, about the danger of ignoring red flags, about the thin line between love and violence. And so we end not with closure, but with reflection. Reflection on the life of a young woman whose promise was stolen. Reflection on the countless others who walk the same dangerous path. Reflection on the urgent need to see, to act, to protect before it is too late. Because in the end, the story of Bernicia Lightfoot is not just about how she died. It's about what we do now, with her memory, her music, her warning, and it leaves us with one final haunting question. How many more voices will be silenced before we finally decide that love should never hurt? If this story has moved you, if you want to hear more stories that peel back the layers of violence and betrayal, make sure to subscribe. There are truths out there that will leave you speechless and you don't want to miss them.